Raynald Desjardins is a prominent organized crime figure in Montreal and a former associate of the Rizzuto crime family. In 2010, he was part of a violent effort to take control of the Rizzuto's operations. He is currently serving a 14-year prison sentence for his role in the 2011 murder of the acting boss of New York's Bonanno crime family, Salvatore Montagna. The French-Canadian Desjardins has been described as the most influential non-Italian in the Montreal Mafia since William Aubrant and Armand Corville. Despite sharing the same surname, he is not related to André Desjardins, a notoriously corrupt union boss turned loan shark. By the mid-1980s, law enforcement saw Desjardins as a major figure in Montreal drug trafficking. He was considered the right-hand man to Rizzuto family leader Vito Rizzuto and was once described by authorities as the supplier of drugs for the Montreal Mafia. He began his career in his teenage years working as a waiter in a mafia-owned nightclub in Montreal. To supplement his income, he started selling hashish and heroin for his employers and was first convicted of drug trafficking in 1971. During the following decade, he was close to Cotroni crime family member Joseph DeMaulo, so much so that the men became brothers-in-law. Raynald was one of a small number of French Canadians who became a senior member of the Montreal Mafia. DeMaulo's marriage to Desjardins' sister had given him a unique status within the organization, despite being a non-Sicilian. Among these was the Lebanese connection, a drug smuggling pipeline from Lebanon to Montreal, which the Rizzuto family took over during the late 1970s and early 1980s. In the spring of 1984, Desjardins and Rizzuto went to Milan to meet with Lebanese suppliers. It was agreed that from then on they would deal only with the Rizzuto family. Later that year, Italian police intercepted 3.5 tons of hashish on a ship from Beirut bound for Montreal. On board, they found a pager registered in Desjardins' name. The Rizzuto family had prior ties to Lebanon. In the 1970s, they began trading arms for hashish with the Phalange, a right-wing Lebanese militia fanatically committed to upholding Maronite Christian supremacy in Lebanon. The Rizzuto family was one of the group's main suppliers during the Lebanese Civil War. The hashish was brought by ship from Beirut to the Atlantic coast of Canada, where it was transferred to smaller boats and offloaded in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. From there, it was brought to Montreal by truck. Desjardins' smuggling route was intended to avoid dealing with the Irish-Canadian West End gang who ran the port of Montreal. In 1980, the FBI discovered that the Rizzuto family had been smuggling U.S.-bought M16 assault rifles and ammunition to Montreal for export to Lebanon. The investigation started after the Rizzuto family hired a band of local criminals to break into a National Guard armory in Boston. The burglary itself was unusual, but the smuggling of guns bound for Lebanon from the United States into Canada was not. In 1987, on the advice of a Newfoundland criminal named Michael Hiscock, Desjardins decided that the ghost town of Ireland's Eye, located on a remote island off the coast of Newfoundland, would be used for the operation's handoffs. Ireland's Eye was chosen for its natural harbor, the ruins of a town abandoned in the 1960s, and its unused docks. The new operation began attracting attention on the Newfoundland mainland when local fishermen noticed mysterious convoys of trucks passing through their remote area at night. By this time, it was police estimated that 90% of the hashish in Canada came from Lebanon. In December of that year, Desjardins, Rizzuto, and 4 others were arrested and charged by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for attempting to smuggle hashish into the country by boat. The police alleged that he oversaw the family's relations with the Phalange and was in charge of the entire Lebanese hashish smuggling operation. The case against them was eventually dismissed in 1990 by the Newfoundland Supreme Count after it was discovered that officers had tried to record conversations between the accused and their lawyers during the trial. In 1991 to 1992, Raynald was the target of another police investigation, Project Bedtime, alleging that he had imported 50 tons of hashish from Libya, which was intercepted at the port of Montreal following a tip, but no charges were ever brought against him. In the early 1990s, Desjardins was reportedly given the task of handling relations with the Hells Angels, whose Montreal Nomads chapter was headed by Maurice Boucher. At the time, Desjardins held a job as a sale representative for Amusements Deluxe, a Montreal company that supplied billiard tables, pinball machines, and video games to bars and convenience stores all over Canada. Amusements Deluxe was mostly a cash business, and it has been alleged that the company was a front for the Rizzuto family, used to launder its profits, and that Desjardins was more than just a sales representative, but actually ran the company. Desjardins had ties to outlaw biker gangs, and in 1993 he was arrested as part of an RCMP investigation called Operation Jaggy for his role in the attempted import of 700 kilos of cocaine from Venezuela together with the Hells Angels. On July 9, 1993, Desjardins called Rizzuto on his cell phone, saying he needed to see him right away. The RCMP who were listening in noted that Desjardins was the only associate of Rizzuto who did not use the formal and respectful tone when addressing him, indicating that he had power within the Rizzuto family. On August 25, 1993, Desjardins was arrested as part of Operation Jaggy and refused the Crown's offer of a plea bargain in exchange for testifying against Rizzuto. Desjardins stated, "Vito's my buddy, I'm going to do my time, and when I get out, I'll go shake his hand." At the time of his arrest, Desjardins exposed a corrupt RCMP officer, Jean Lord, whom he revealed had been trying to sell him information, which he hoped would lead to a reduced sentence. He later pleaded guilty on October 24, 1994, to being part of a conspiracy to bring up to 5,000 kilos of cocaine into Canada, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. While serving time for his conviction, Desjardins, nicknamed the Millionaire, exerted control over his institution and its other prisoners. The renovation of a prison jogging track, by a contractor with whom he was associated and paid for with his own money, prompted a federal investigation. A report by Corrections Canada described Desjardins as a leader of a Leclerc prison gang consisting mostly of imprisoned Hells Angels and mafiosi that engaged in violent incidents in a bid to dominate the prison. He was treated like he was a king, having his own personal computer and desk in his cell. Despite being implicated in multiple crimes against other inmates, he was never charged. Upon his release on June 2, 2004, Desjardins announced he was done with crime and intended to become a construction entrepreneur. Despite this claim, he later surfaced in the Charbonneau Commission's investigation into graft in public contracts. Desjardins was described as a millionaire who owned 3 construction companies in Montreal: Desjardins & Company, Desjardins & C, and Investissement La Cedar and Kane. His companies were mostly active in buying and developing land in the east end of Montreal, which had been sold by the city for a fraction of their market value. Desjardins called himself a good friend of Jocelyn Dupuis, a senior FTQ union official, saying the FTQ union helped to make construction at his sites go smoothly. In 2004, Vito Rizzuto was indicted by a Brooklyn grand jury for his involvement in a 1981 triple murder and was eventually extradited to the U.S. to stand trial. He later entered into a plea bargain and was incarcerated until 2012. In his absence, the struggle for control between the Rizzutos, Desjardins, Montagna, and others led to a bloody string of killings. In 2018, Italian court records described Desjardins as the leader of this turf war against the Rizzutos. On September 16, 2011, he was the target of a failed assassination attempt when a gunman opened fire on him as he was driving near his Laval home. He and Sal Montagna, once allies, had a falling out. purportedly over control of loan sharking and bookmaking. Wiretap evidence also indicated that Raynald Desjardins suspected Sal Montagna of the failed attempt on his life. Less than 2 months after the 2011 attempted hit, Desjardins took part in the plot that led to Montagna's murder. Sal was found dead on November 24, 2011. At the time, he was suspected of trying to shake down construction companies in the Montreal area. Montagna was born in Montreal, Quebec in 1971. He was raised in Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily. In the mid-1980s, at the age of 15, his family immigrated to the United States and settled in the Bronx, New York. It is unclear when Montagna became active in the life of crime or when he became a made man in the Bonanno crime family. During the late 1990s, Montagna's name was overheard in wiretap conversations between boss Joseph Big Joe Massino and other reputed members of the Bonanno crime family. Little is known of Sal's personal life other than that he married Francesca Carcione and lived in a modest home in Elmont, Long Island, with her and their 3 daughters. He started a small metalworking company called Matrix Steel Co., located at 50 Bogart Street in Bushwick, Brooklyn, managed by his wife. Matrix Steel manufactures structural and rail mill products, gray and ductile iron foundry crucibles, foundry converters, casting machines, sizing or embossing presses, foundry mold machines, and foundry dies and tooling. It was around this time that Montagna was given the nickname Sal the Iron Worker. In 2002, he was arrested along with the crew of Patrick DeFilippo for illegal gambling and loan sharking charges. He refused to answer questions before a grand jury and was charged with criminal contempt of court. He later pleaded guilty to the charge in 2003 and was placed on a 5-year probation. In late 2003, U.S. law enforcement and the FBI listed Montagna as an acting captain and capo-regime of the Bonanno family on behalf of DeFilippo and the Sicilian faction based in the Bronx. After longtime Bonanno boss Big Joe Massino became an informant in 2004, Vincent Vinny Gorgeous Basciano was recognized as the reputed boss of the Bonanno crime family, only to discover that Massino would testify against Basciano as well. In 2006, as Basciano was facing jail time, he stated that he would promote the Sicilian faction of the old Bonanno crew back into the family's leadership. As Montagna was recognized as the reputed acting boss of the Bonanno crime family from 2006 until 2010, with Nicholas Nicky Mouth Santora as underboss and Anthony Rabito as consigliere, making the administration of the Bonanno crime family once again complete. At that time, Sal gained the nickname Bambino Boss due to his relatively young age, being 35. In 2008, Montagna was still the reputed acting boss of the Bonannos, controlling the entire Bronx faction of the family, as the Daily News linked him to known Sicilian Bonanno official Baldassare Baldo Amato. On April 6, 2009, Sal was arrested by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement as he left Matrix Steel. The 2003 criminal contempt conviction allowed U.S. authorities to strip him of his green card and deport him to Canada. He was succeeded by Vincent Badalamenti as Bonanno family boss. According to mob writer Jerry Capisi, it was understood Sal would have no standing or authority within Montreal's then-dominant Rizzuto crime family. In 2011, following the assassinations of several major Rizzuto mobsters starting in 2009, Montagna was identified as one of 3 major mobsters trying to fill the resulting power vacuum, if not take over the Montreal Mafia himself. He, along with Joe DiMaolo and his brother-in-law, Raynald Desjardins, attempted to take control of Montreal's Mafia from the Rizzuto family. Police responded to gunshots in a suburban district of Îlot-Tresor on November 24, 2011, and found the body of Salvatore Montagna in the city of Charlemagne, Quebec, Canada, on Montreal's North Shore region. Witnesses reported that Sal Montagna jumped in the river in an attempt to escape his killers. Law enforcement believed that Montagna was brought to the house of convicted smuggler Jack Arthur Simpson, as his vehicle was later found parked on a Montreal street. By June 2016, authorities were more specific as to how Sal had died. he was shot 3 times inside Simpson's home and ran outside in a futile attempt to escape. After crossing a narrow section of the Assumption River, Montagna collapsed and was later declared dead in a hospital. In 2015, Desjardins was the target of another assassination plot by Maurice Boucher, head of the Nomads chapter of the Montreal Hells Angels. The plot failed, and Boucher pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. A number of individuals were charged with the murder of Montagna, including Raynald Desjardins and convicted smuggler Jack Arthur Simpson. Eventually, Desjardins Simpson, Vittorio Mirarchi, Calogero Miliotto, Pietro Magistrale, Stephen D'Addario, Stephen Fracas, and Felice Raccaniello all admitted to participating in the plot to kill Montagna and accepted plea deals. Raynald pleaded guilty in 2015 to a reduced charge of conspiracy to commit murder, and the following year he was sentenced to 14 years in prison, including time served. At the time of the sentencing, he had served at least the equivalent of a 7.5-year prison term since his arrest.